Good evening. This is Inside the Courtroom. We are taking you inside the courtroom of the trial for Lori Vallow Daybell, who is on trial right now for a charge of conspiracy to commit murder against her husband, Charles Vallow. That is happening in a Maricopa County court, and that is where KPNX reporter Erica Stapleton has been. She is taking us inside the courtroom each day. Erica is thankful for your posts that you are having online. You're letting us inside. Of course, we are streaming this trial live, but people have jobs, people have lives, so we know that everybody can't be there for every minute of this trial, yet it is a fascinating one. So we appreciate you being able to give us that look behind the scenes, you being in that gallery and watching as things happen, even things that we can't see on the camera. So we appreciate you bringing us all of that insight. So let's start right off the bat. I mean, it was a day full of, there were some fireworks in the courtroom, some fiery cross-examination, some very interesting testimony. Let's talk about Nancy Jo Hancock. So this morning she was called to the stand, and we had mentioned, I think on Monday, how we expected to hear from somebody who had been out on a date with Charles just before he died. In fact, it was the night before. So this is a woman who, she said they met on an LDS dating site. They had just met earlier that month, July 2019, I believe. So a pretty new relationship. But how did she describe that? And how did she describe their interactions?
You know, she said she met Charles. It would have been, we learned it was probably within a week. She had only met him, said that they had a lot of good texting, good banter. She described him as clever, as witty, as charming. And they, as I said, had shared a lot of text messages. They were having hours-long phone calls and ultimately decided that they wanted to meet. Charles was coming in from Houston. He and Lori had been living separately. He was coming in so he could take JJ to school. And according to Nancy Jo, he was meeting with a realtor friend so he could try to find his own place in Arizona again, because he and Lori were at that point living separately, even though they were still married. So they decided, okay, once he's in town, July 10th, the night before Charles would ultimately die, they did go out. They had a great time, kind of closed the place down, she said. And she had plans to meet with him the next day. And what we know and what she didn't at the time was that he was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. And she said that she texted him and she called him and didn't hear back and thought, oh, maybe I misread this situation. But she didn't find out until a few months later that he had been shot in this way, and ultimately, let people know that she had had this interaction with him before, and that this all does tie together because she said in her conversations with Charles, they talked about his relationship with Lori and how it had been strained and how it was problematic. And she didn't get into all the details of that in court today, although she almost could have. And we'll get to that a little later. There was a really incredible moment with the judge that occurred just before the lunch break. But that was essentially what the state brought in from her. But then, of course, Lori Vallow Daybell, who's representing herself, had the opportunity to ask her questions. So that's the kind of the second part to this, where you saw things get really, really, really uncomfortable.
Based upon your discussions, how long did you think there had been issues going on between Charles and his wife?
For several months, but more intensely since the beginning of that year was 2019, so since the beginning of that year.
You told us that Charles talked to you let me ask you, yes or no, did he talk to you in great detail about his relationship with Lori Vallow?
Yes.
You told us you met on an LDS dating site, right?
Correct.
So are you a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
I am.
Was there anything that you were hearing that you thought were outside of your beliefs?
A lot of things. Charles was ecstatic to see JJ. He was coming to see JJ. So excited to take him to school the next morning.
Do you go on dates with married men?
Naturally? Argumentative. I'm going to also object under 611 for harassment.
So are you trying to tell me and this jury that you went on one date with my husband and he told you all the details of our lives?
I'm telling you the truth, and that's what I know.
So you spent your whole date getting to know each other, talking about me.
Don't flatter yourself. No, we did not spend the whole time talking about you.
And
Quite
Andrea,
a
what's
little.
Yeah,
Go
Andrea,
ahead.
what's really, well, I guess first, yeah, what's your reaction to that? Because I do have some follow-up, but I'll let you react here.
Well, it's just interesting because, of course, that the don't flatter yourself. There is certainly a tone there that you can see. She's been questioned. She's been answering the same question repetitively, ask a different way. And so probably you can sense some of that frustration as she is sitting there on the stand. And we know, of course, there has been a lot of, objections all throughout the morning. With the very first witness was there. We'll talk about that retired officer who was on the stand, lots of objections there. So I think at this point, probably everyone in the room was a little bit worn out, probably just by the process. And I think that certainly came out from Nancy Jo there on the stand, which then led into a discussion, right? A jury question. And this, it got even more
before we get
confusing
into that, I really want to
interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think there was a moment there, and unfortunately, I guess my understanding is that it wasn't picked up on the stream. So I do want to highlight this really incredible moment because, you hear where Lori's going with her questions there, and she keeps drilling in on this issue of Charles Vallow meeting with Nancy Jo and where they were talking about her. So she, follows up on that a few times throughout the course of her cross-examination, which took up a good chunk of time there. And at one point she said, okay, well, can you tell me specifically what you were talking about? And you hear Nancy Jo say, can I give a narrative? And which is not something you're supposed to do unless you kind of, unless that comes up in a way you're supposed to be, you're supposed to be talking about it in that sort of way. And at that point, the judge said, okay, let's remove the jury. And once they were gone, he talks to Lori Vallow Daybell and says, are you sure you want to ask that question? Because that will really open a door here that, could lead to a lot of different things. And we know from our reporting that could be some of the threats Charles was feeling from Lori at that time, some of her dark religious beliefs that he was seeing and was warning people about. So ultimately, we were waiting to see if she was going to be able to give this narrative, but then they broke for lunch. And when we came back, that's when Lori Vallow Daybell changed up her line of questioning. It was still a bit combative, but we ultimately didn't go there. But I can tell you that once we left the courtroom, everyone in the gallery, we were all just collectively like, oh my God, because this was... Yeah. It was really a really like striking moment. It was like jaws on the floor. People were in utter shock that this was something that could have, we were on the verge of hearing maybe more than we were expecting out of a witness. But as you said, that kind of rolled into the jury question.
Right. And this is something that, if you're watching the stream, you aren't seeing those sidebars. There are certain things that are protected from public record. So these are things that wouldn't be a matter of, wouldn't be part of the court record. Those they're shutting down, either removing the jury or even removing people from the gallery if they needed to do that, if they needed to have a discussion that wasn't on the record. But they're also using headphones, right, to have some of these discussions. Explain how that's working in court.
Well, and the reason they're doing this is because Lori Vallow Daybell can't approach the judge because she is incarcerated and a convicted felon. So they're using this system so the public and those who are, following along with the stream here can't hear what they're saying. There has to be these private conversations, and basically she'll put on a headset, the judge will put on a headset, someone on her team gets a headset, and then the prosecution, they all have headsets, and you hear white noise in the courtroom, but you can hear their mouth, or you can see their mouths moving. We can't hear what they're saying, but that's where they have some of these discussions. And that's ultimately when, in Arizona, jurors are allowed to ask questions after every witness. The judge kind of checks, are there questions? And in this case, there was. So they take time to review the question. And if it's something they want to ask in open court, they will do so. And in this case, this was a question that was asked. It was something along the lines of, this was a question to Nancy Jo, and they asked, did Charles indicate he was feeling stressed? And she answered yes. And she was about to go a little further, but the judge said, let's just keep it at yes or no. Does either side want to follow up on that? And that was ultimately the end of her testimony.
And that is unusual. If for anybody who followed the court case in Idaho, you did not see that. That is not a part of the process here. So the jury asking a question, the only time we see jury questions is during that deliberation. Sometimes the jury will come back with a question for the judge, to help clarify something when they're in their decision-making process. But that idea of the jury being able to ask a question after each witness, that is new to folks who have only seen the trials in Idaho. So definitely interesting. And thank you for explaining that. Now, after Nancy Doe, then we moved to Christina Atwood, just as interesting. Now, tell us about her relationship with the Vallows.
So what we understand and what she testified to in court is that she was part of Lori's and Charles's religious community. They met at church, also a member of the LDS faith. And she said that her family moved here around 2010. So they met the Vallow family sometime after. And, they were, it seemed like they were community friends. They at one point met up with Charles and Lori while they were on vacation in Hawaii, and they all had kids that maybe got along at certain points in time. So they knew of each other. But then we started to hear that things were escalating in 2019, and Lori and other people, they would have some of these gatherings. And at these gatherings, there would be some darker beliefs coming up. And this is something that has come up in the trials in Idaho. This incorporates some of the teachings of Daybell, the Doomsday author. So we've heard some of these things before, but we've not, to my recollection, heard it from Christina Atwood, at least not in this setting, and at least not as it pertains to Charles Vallow. So here's a bit of some of the questioning that the prosecution was asking her.
Did you hear Lori speak about Charles being possessed more than once?
Yes.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
Did she tell you, as well as the other women who were at this meeting in February, that her husband was possessed?
Yes.
So it wasn't just you in a private conversation?
Correct.
She was open about it?
Yes.
Did you hear Alex making some comments?
Yes.
And you told us that they made you uncomfortable. What were these comments?
He stated he wished that he could just kill Charles.
Okay. Was Lori around when he was saying this?
Yes, one of the times.
Okay. So he said it more than once.
Yes.
Can you describe first part of his demeanor when he's saying this about wanting to just kill Charles?
It was jocular, just as I recall, he was standing up and just talking about it pretty loudly.
And you said one of the times that he said this, it was around Lori.
Yes.
Did she react in any way to hearing her brother say that he wished she could just kill her husband?
Not that I recall.
And so you already heard Lori talking for at least a couple months about her husband being possessed, right?
Yes.
Inhabited by these dark, evil spirits, right?
Yes.
And now you're hearing her brother say that he wished he could just kill him.
Yes.
And this is on June 9th of 2019.
Yes.
Now, Alex there is Alex Cox, Lori Vallow Daybell's brother. Right. He is the one that she is, accused of conspiring with to kill her husband. So really disturbing testimony. And that was the word Christina used. She said, yeah, it's disturbing to hear all of this. So all of this is coming out this afternoon, and you have to be wondering what the jurors are thinking when they hear this.
Absolutely. And we knew this was going to be the state's plan. It's to set that stage for this wasn't an act of self-defense in a moment when something happened, as the defense is going to claim. But instead, they're setting the stage for this being something that was planned and ultimately, even shared among other people, kind of setting the tone for this is, if this happens, right? This is, like you said, they have a religious belief in saying that because this person is possessed. Now, the jury here doesn't know this, but we know that that's the exact same thing that she said about the two children, about JJ and about Tylee. So, of course, for us, that's a theme but as you said, the jury doesn't know that, and it will be interesting
No.
to see how they react to that, and how that
Yeah.
impact on them. What about how they're reacting just to her in general, with all of these objections to the way the line of questioning, and also interesting today were the admonishment from the judge, because after a question or after an answer, Lori has a tendency to make a comment, to essentially editorialize, and sometimes it's as simple as a interesting, and then the prosecution, of course, will object to that. The jury or the judge today, warning a couple of times, you can't do that. You can't make comments. You can't, ultimately, you can't testify in your line of questioning. So have you seen the jury react to that at all? Are you getting a sense, kind of what is their mood that you can tell just from watching them?
Well, it's interesting because this isn't the first time the judge has told her this. We heard yesterday, after the jury had left, he said, look, you cannot keep making comments like this after your testimony or after you're asking questions. You must just ask questions. They can respond. You can't react. That's going to be a problem. And she continued to do it today. And at one point even apologized to the judge afterwards. But it's, you get these different versions of Lori. And from what I understand, the jurors are, they're really engrossed with what's going on here. They seem like they're really paying attention. And we can see that from some of the questions that they've been asking. But I haven't seen anyone kind of be like, jaw drop. That's been more the people in the gallery who have been really following this case and know all of the background. But I do wonder if at some point, because, we have heard discussions about Tylee, about JJ, about, at one point, someone yesterday, one of the people who was testifying said, to prepare for this, I reviewed my testimony in Idaho. So we're wondering if at some point the jury may start to get a sense that there's something bigger here than what's being presented to them. And we heard about that a little bit when Nancy Jo was on the stand, because Lori, when she was cross-examining her, she said, well, have you ever met this brother of mine? Or have you ever met Brandon Boudreaux, who is the alleged victim in her second murder conspiracy case here in Arizona? And, some of the things that Nancy Jo said was like, well, I'm aware of this person because of your situation, because of because of everything around you. Right. So I feel like the jury must be picking up that there is more to this story. Whether they can hear about that in court will be another story.
And I've always tried to you can't help but try to put yourself in their position, and knowing that the rules that they're under, where they are, absolutely forbidden to go and research any of that, to look up anything about this case, to talk about it with anyone. And so knowing that there's an unknown and wondering what that is, you can't help but think that they'd be anxious, almost hopeful that they were able to put some of those pieces together at some point in this trial. It'd be difficult, just human nature is that you want to have all the answers and you want to have all that information, especially if you have to make a serious decision at the end of this trial. And of course, the rules of the court will determine what they're able to hear and what they can't hear. Now, speaking of rules of the court, let's talk about how the day started. We'll backtrack just a little bit, because that was another interesting kind of back and forth with Lori and a witness when the retired detective, the officer, he was finishing his testimony from yesterday. But we got into an interesting line of questioning when Lori was cross-examining him about the shooting, the evidence around the shooting. We talked about the casings. We talked about where Charles Vallow's body was, right, where things were found. And she got into a line of questioning about what he was wearing. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. And, we started the day this way. So we thought, wow, this is some really wild questioning here. And only to learn that we had two more bombshell witnesses come after. But yeah, it was Detective Daniel Coons. He's retired from Chandler Police. He started his testimony yesterday, and they also started Lori's cross-examination yesterday. And that's what they picked up with this morning. And at one point, it's so interesting because you can tell she is so detailed in what she's asking about, but is somehow still in this situation. So it's I'll explain a little better here, because she starts asking about Charles Vallow's shirt and whether the detective knew if it was bamboo, if it was made of bamboo material, and if it was tight fitting. And she is, her line of questioning was trying to insinuate, I believe, that, well, his tight clothes could have caused some of the markings on the wounds that you're saying was a result of, him being shot. But I'm saying his tight clothing could have created some of these markings. And then she goes on to say, well, did you remove my floorboard? Did you test my floorboard? Did you call the shirt company to see if you could understand the material better? And it was just a lot of questions that I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this isn't really, it feels like it's not helping her case in any way. I think she's trying to establish doubt in any nook and cranny that she possibly can. But by saying, you didn't test his shirt, which I feel like isn't very typical in certain cases. I'm sure there are scenarios where there would be tested, but they had the bullets there. They had the body. They had a shooter, Alex Cox, saying that he was the one who shot him, that they don't need to do they don't have to analyze every thread that's on the scene. And my takeaway from that was, okay, she's really drilling in here. And I don't know if that's going to land the way she wants it to land with a jury. And it was wild because she is so, assertive when she does this too. She doesn't waver in what she's saying. And you can tell that she's at some point prepared this questioning and has written it down and has, thought about this and has decided that this is how she wants to present the case. But those were not the only tense moments with the detective. Take a listen.
Okay. So all you really know for sure, after your 5 years of investigation, is that my husband was shot 2 times. 1 by that particular gun, 2 with those particular bullets, at my residence, and that he passed away as a result of that. Would that be correct?
Oversimplified. There is a lot more information that is available to us for that.
Is that correct? Is that question correct?
Those are some known facts, yes, but that is not all we know.
So you can't really tell me for sure who shot him, can you?
Well, as we've established, I was not present when it happened. I can only go with the facts of what people have said and what the evidence shows.
Okay. You don't really know what time he was shot, do you?
Actually, no, I don't.
Okay. You don't really know if he was falling back or lying supine on the floor, do you?
Yes, I do.
You don't really know what time my husband actually passed away, do you?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Thank you. No more questions.
And it's interesting because she's asking this like, you weren't there, but so how could you possibly know how he died? And he's like, well, there's evidence. And she's like, well, can you be if you didn't see it, that's kind of, it feels like that's her logic. Like, oh, if you didn't see it, then it's very possible it didn't happen the way you're saying the evidence says it does. So it's really been interesting to see.
Well, and as you said, her questioning is clearly, it's a very deliberate line of questioning. So these aren't off the cuff. She is, is drilling down, I think exactly what you said, trying to raise any sort of doubt. And yet the way the questions are phrased, and even including how much the shirt cost in the question about, did you know that, that what he was wearing, $200 bamboo shirt, or however she put that, and then of course, a lot of those objections about that's not relevant. The question not being relevant. And so it's interesting to see, again, if that's going to work. Like you said, I'm not sure how that plays in the jury. I think that is the intent. And I guess time will tell if that works. And if we're going to see the same kind of questioning with all of the witnesses, is it going to be a somewhat irrelevant line of questioning in hopes of creating some form, offering those questions, hoping that some people hear it. I also will be interested to see long term. You said she apologized today. She said, I'll stop doing that. I think she told the judge, I'll quit making those comments. She said that before. It will be interesting to see how he responds and really what kind of action he could take if that doesn't stop happening. Because you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, Yeah,
exactly. And you asked earlier, can you tell how the jury is kind of responding to that? And I think it might be a little too soon. I feel like they're still getting their, their bearings with this case, so to speak. If I had to imagine not knowing anything about this and coming in and being like, all right, this, and then you start hearing about, religion and this, there's a lot of moving parts here. But I will say, noticing the judge feels like he's losing his patience a little bit with her, because it's constant. Most of the objections she's facing are sustained, and she kind of takes a minute, composes herself, and keeps going. But it's hard. And I don't know if we can do that every single day. And it was interesting because she's cross-examined there have been, I believe, 6 witnesses so far, and she's cross-examined all but her friend Christina. And I thought that was interesting because this is the first one she had known prior to all of this, or known of at least, had a relationship with prior to this case. And it was also the first time that the religious beliefs or the dark spirits, that sort of vernacular came into play here. So I thought that was interesting that she chose not to question her friend about anything that she said.
And you wonder if that is the dynamic of that friendship, questioning somebody and questioning everything that they would know. I mean, all of your interactions, if that was just better to not even touch that, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. You be careful about what you open yourself up to. Maybe that was advice from her advisors, but it will be interesting to watch and see. Of course, this is only day 3, and already lots and lots of great testimony and interesting dynamics in the courtrum.
Well, and I'd say too
So what do we expect tomorrow?
I'm curious to see. Well, I guess not just tomorrow, but we're expecting to hear from, her son is on the witness list. Her brother, her surviving brother, I should say, Adam Cox, is on the witness list. So it'll be interesting to see if she'll choose to cross-examine her family members at some point in time. And it's just going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. But court actually ended pretty early today. I think it seemed like they had finished with Christina Atwood, and maybe the state wasn't prepared to call their next witness or didn't have the person on the ready. So we ended a little earlier than the 4:30 p.m. local time, and we aren't aware of who their next witness might be because they haven't been going in order of their witness list. So we'll see, but we're expecting, this train to keep moving forward at this point in time.
Awesome. And you will be inside the courtroom. Now, no court on Friday, so tomorrow will be the last day of testimony this week, but you will be there. Erica will be keeping us abreast of everything that's happening as it happens, so you can follow along online. You can watch watch our streaming live coverage of that trial as it happens. And also, we will be back here with you tomorrow night for another episode as we go inside the courtroom here for the Lori Vallow Daybell murder conspiracy trial. So we hope you'll join us for that tomorrow.